And then we will kick off with our formal session. So hang tight with us and we'll be with you in just a second. This is a great chance to get a cup of coffee. If you're a coffee drinker, some of you are decaf, some of you are not decaf. I don't drink any of the coffee. I drink the Diet Coke. I call it the Diet Coke because I'm a Glennon Doyle fan and she calls it the sports and I call things the Diet Coke. It's a whole thing. So welcome to Human-Centered Leading. We're delighted that you're here and we'll get started here in just one moment. Let's see here. Okay, let's go ahead and kick off and honor those who had a chance to get here right away. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And if you are someone who are joining us a little bit late or watching this later on, we're glad you're here as well. And certainly we always will have the recording available on the Hummingbird website and on YouTube. So first of all, welcome to Human-Centered Leading. My name is Brian McComak, and I am the CEO and founder of Hummingbird Humanity. And I'm thrilled to be with you today. Thrilled to have Rocki and Jaime with me today, which I'll introduce more formally in just a moment. Human-Centered Leading is our new monthly conversation series where we are going to invite thought leaders and experts to share with us about about a current workplace challenge and their thoughts and ideas and suggestions for how we solve that workplace challenge through the lens of humanity. So I'm really excited for today's conversation. If you are someone who would like to leverage the accessibility options on Zoom, we have enabled the closed captioning, and you can turn on your closed captioning with the toolbar at the bottom. And if you are watching on LinkedIn, you can click on the three dots on the top right and enable the closed captioning there. This is also our very first time going on LinkedIn Live, so we're thrilled to be with you on LinkedIn Live. If you have any suggestions for us as we're learning how to make the best experience for all of you out there, feel free to share your suggestions with us. And along the way, feel free to share your questions either on LinkedIn or in the Zoom chat. We certainly want to hear from you and answer your questions along the way as well. And lastly, I'll say we are a community here at Hummingbird, and we invite you to connect with each other. So introduce yourselves in the chat or on LinkedIn, share where you're zooming in from or dialing in from. I don't know if we really dial in anymore, do we? I just aged myself. Share your LinkedIn link. Let's all connect with each other and continue to build this community, because we're all here because we believe that there's a possibility where we can create workplaces, continue to create workplaces where humans thrive and help some of those workplaces that have some way to go to get there. So that's we're all here for a shared purpose, and let's support each other on that journey. Before we dive into today's conversation, I want to acknowledge that there's a few heritage days, months, or weeks that we wanted to acknowledge. So yesterday, of course, was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which was honored by many organizations and individuals around our country and around the globe, honoring the great work of Dr. Martin Luther King. January 22nd is the Lunar New Year. So some of your colleagues may be celebrating the Lunar New Year. And one of the things that you can always do is check out the Hummingbird website for these upcoming events and Heritage Month. So we share on our social media and our newsletter. So that way you can be up to speed and celebrate and honor your colleagues and wish them a happy Lunar New Year if that's something that someone in your team is celebrating. And finally, we have in January, the Holocaust Remembrance Day that we wanted to highlight here. Certainly, this was a tragic event that is worth remembering, so it doesn't happen again. And I think even more important today, when I think about the Holocaust Remembrance conversation, is the terrible acts of anti-Semitism that are emerging in our country and around the globe. And so I think it's important for us to continue to honor those in the Jewish community and continue to be part of the fight to welcome and respect everyone in our workplaces and in our organizations. So with that, I want to welcome Jaime Klein, who is the founder and CEO of Inspire Human Resources, and Rocki Howard. Let's see if I can get my computer to work. Did I miss Rocki? Rocki Howard. Oh, you were first. I skipped over you. Sorry, Rocki. Rocki Howard, who's the Chief Equity and Impact Officer at the Mom Project. Okay, we've had enough of my screen share. Hello, everyone. Lovely to see you. Jaime and Rocki, delighted to have you here. And I wanted to invite you both to share your own introduction. And I'll invite Jaime to go first. At Hummingbird, we have a tradition that we share both a little bit about who we are and what we do, rather than just what we do, which is sort of typically what happens. So Jaime, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. Well, great to be here, Brian. I think of you as a long time colleague and friend. So thanks for the invitation to join the conversation with Rocki. So I'm the founder and CEO of Inspire, and we've been around for 15 years. And I'm the fiercely proud mom of two 17-year-olds, Benjamin and Anna, who are both seniors in our little town of New Jersey, where we are living. And if I feel like if there was ever a marketing exercise for all colleges, if we're having two seniors at the same time every day, there's like a new letter or marketing material coming into our homes. That's what's going on in our house right now.
Awesome. Awesome. What about you, Rocki?
I love that. My name is Rocki Howard. I identify as she, her, Black, Christian, Gen X, wife, and mom. I am and have been married to the love of my life for 31 years. I have 4 children, 3 girls and a boy that range from 20 to 32. You know what? I get to wake up in the morning and do what I really love to do, which is to be an advocate for people who are historically underrepresented and their voices their voices aren't always heard, and to work with companies to make space for folks. And I am so excited. I recently took a new role with the Mom Project as Chief Equity and Impact Officer. Well, I'll really get to spend more time with our clients and actually working with them on making space and increasing economic opportunity for mom.
Amazing, amazing. Well, it sounds like that Jaime is about to become an empty nester, and you may be an empty nester. Is that right, Rocki?
Yeah, no, don't fall for that. There's still 2. My son's room is right on the other side of that. And then there's what we in our house call the love children. Do you know that house in everyone's neighborhood where all the kids are more than welcome to show up all the time? I'm that house. We're that house. We wouldn't have it any other way. But there's not only our children, but the children that we call the love children.
I love it. I love it. It's like the more backpacks and shoes in the foyer, the happier you are. That's how it is in our house too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we are happy. But I'm going to tell you, Raymond and I are not crying our eyes out at the thought of being an empty nester. That's not devastating us, right?
Well, how about you, Jaime? How are you feeling about the horizon of empty nest?
You know what? So Darren and I just celebrated 20 years, and I think I haven't quite even wrapped my head around what is ahead for the empty nesting. But what I do know is that I hope to have just a touch more time to travel without being as tethered to the school calendar and mandatory sports stuff. Yeah, that's as far as I've gotten. But I'm going to call you in 6 months. You're going to tell me all the things that I got to know. Yeah.
Well, and I will fully acknowledge that both my sister and I at some point have, or more than one, let's acknowledge that, have returned home to live with mom and dad. I lived with mom and dad for a while during the pandemic. My sister did as well. So it's, I guess that there's like a boomerang reality that's happened sometimes.
Yeah,
For sure.
And I wouldn't want it any other way, but my mom and dad, when they raised my sister and I, they always talked about roots and wings, right? You want to sit down these roots where my sister and I kind of knew that our home was always home, but then these wings to kind of launch and, we can always come back, but I think it centered us. So I try to use the same mindset. We've let our, we've just said to our kids, apply wherever you want. And so many friends are like, you don't want something in 3 hours from home. And I'm just like, no, like they have to go and explore all the things and they'll come back. It's all good.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you both for sharing a little bit about yourself. I already mentioned that I have the privilege to lead the Hummingbird Humanity team. I want to share a little bit more about me as well. I've spent over 25 years in various human resources roles. If you name it in HR, I can say I've done it in one way, shape, or form. Some parts of HR better than others. And certainly it's wonderful to be with two other phenomenal colleagues in the broader HR people or talent space. So thank you for being here again, Jaime and Rocki. On the personal side, I am a white cisgender man, so I want to acknowledge that there's certainly privilege with the identity that my physical or visible identity that I enter spaces with. I'm also a gay man and a disabled person, and those are experiences that I try to use to have those moments where I felt othered or like an outsider, to connect with other individuals who've also been marginalized in their lives. Not to say it's the same. We're not in a competition. It's more about us. How do we just understand each other? And so I try to use those moments to connect with others, and then to use the privilege that I have to make the world a better place. So today, though, we're going to talk about humanity in the hybrid workplace. And I wanted to start with Jaime, to ask you, how do you even define this new reality of hybrid working? I actually had a client, they were like, we don't even like the word hybrid, so we came up with the word blended instead of hybrid. So how are you describing this in the work you're doing?
Yeah, I want to first start off by saying that no matter your size, zip code, or industry, no one has this figured out. And we talk to all the companies of all the sizes in all the land, as our favorite Glennon would say, like, nobody has this figured out. And I think we just need to start there, because if people are saying that they have this fantastic, fully baked process, what they really mean is we're human, we're winding down season 3 of the pandemic, and we're trying a lot of stuff, and we'll get back to you. So, so your question is, where are we in terms of hybrid? I think that there's language like, well, we're an organization that's a 1 and a 4, or 2 and a 3. And it's like, what does this mean? I think everyone is, a lot of organizations have landed on, if they can, obviously a dermatology practice cannot, but if they have a role where they can be virtual, they're very much looking to have some anchor days that the goal is to be in place in a location where people can come together and with intention get together for a real reason. And tactically, I don't know, they say like Thursday is the new Friday because no one's in the office on Friday. So if you want to get drinks with someone or gather, it's like, let's get together Thursday night.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, and I want to just continue sort of anchoring, like, how are we describing this world? So Rocki, what is anything you would add to what Jaime shared?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to lead with what Jaime shared and really double down into that. None of us have it figured out. And since we're talking about human-centric leadership, I want to put my hand up and be the first one to say, I don't have it figured out, right? It is a journey. And so it's interesting, we were talking about this earlier today, and this might be a good place for me to infuse this comment. We need to lead with a little bit of patience and grace. We don't quite have it figured out. And every time you think you have a piece of it figured out, it shifts and changes. Remember how all excited we were when we went to our first virtual happy hour and we thought this was the solution to all our problems. And then 6 months later, everyone was like, if I go to another virtual happy hour, get invited, I'm literally going to throw my computer against the wall. So it is a journey. And we just have to have grace and patience along the way. For me, I work for an organization that is fully remote with a core. And the reason I say that is because we have a core office. And so we use that office to bring people together, as Jaime said, with purpose. We do believe that people need to interact and bond. And so we bring our functional teams together in our office, once, twice a year, and those teams get to come together and interact, and sometimes some cross-functional teams. And if you're in that location and want to gather a group, et cetera, together, you can do that. I do think when I hear people talking about hybrid, it is that, that kind of combination between you can work in the office, you don't have to work there all the time, you can work at home, there's some flexibility. Some people architect it like you're a red, and so you work in the office on Wednesday and Thursdays, and you blue, and you work Monday through Thursdays. And some others have the flexibility to be able to say you kind of come and go as you want to. But I do think that we're continuing to see a combination of what people prefer and what people like.
Mhm. I love the analogy that you had about in the beginning, it was so fun to get on those virtual happy hours, right? And then you're like, I'm going to do a college reunion and whatever, like it was like reunion central. But I think that the key is if you're going to get together in person, it has to be with intention, it has to be deliberate. And I think it's important that leaders also define we're coming together because we want to also do some things that are just fun for fun's sake, right?
Yes.
The leadership team retreat, and half of it was, just planning for 23. And part of it was doing a walking tour of Manhattan to look behind the scenes for the theater district. And it was interesting to walk through the theater district and see that, now like pot is legalized, it like smelled like college, but the college dorms from what I hear. But my point is that was that's like a fun, interesting experience. Like we all experienced together, like how odd Times Square in Manhattan looked compared to when we were together last week. I could not have architected anything in a hybrid environment to make that happen. And that hour and a half tour was like one of my highlights of 22. So it's like those types of things. Forget the 8-hour workday. It isn't the workday. It's like what we're doing when we're together.
Oh my goodness. Well, and one thing that I know, I think we've all used this phrase already in the conversation. And I remember learning this from you first, Jaime, was the difference between saying return to work and return to workplace. Would you share like why that was important to you? Because I still remember you, and that was such an aha moment for me.
Sure. I think that, I don't know about you, I think we were too productive when we couldn't leave home. Like we've proven that we can work like we've never worked from home. Like once we kind of figured out like the folding chair and the dining room table set up, and then realized, oh gosh, my back hurts from the dining room chair, I need a better chair. Like once we went through those iterations of tech setup, we got crazy productive. So I don't think that the work ever stopped. And just to acknowledge that there was so much energy put in different quarters of 20, 21, part of 22 about the return to office plan. And they were all edited based on where we were in our journey with the pandemic, but the work never stopped. What I do want to acknowledge is that for a lot of our HR, comms, and facility brethren, that was their work, just getting ready for whenever we could return to create the blue and the red or whatever it might be, or de-densify the office space, or reimagine what lunchrooms look like, all that stuff. And a lot of those plans that were drafted in 20 didn't come into place until Labor Day 22. So I think that the work never ended. I think what has changed though is the attempt to try to make meaningful decisions and try to figure out apprenticeship and leadership mentoring virtually. That's the thing that I haven't seen fully come back, that now everyone's stumped on how to make happen for their organizations. Yeah.
And I may take this on a tangent a bit. I hope not to, maybe we'll see. But I think what you
I love a good tangent, Rocki. So go
Yeah, we love a
ahead,
good
go
tangent.
for it.
Let's go for a good tangent. But what I was sitting here thinking about is that we know how important language matters. And one of the things that I think has become increasingly more important as we spend more time behind our screen and without the context of physically being together, where we can see like, well, she said that's okay, but her shoulders are a little bit up and I can see the body language and they're leaning back and this is not okay, right? That we have to be more purposeful about our language. And so when I think about that from a, equity and inclusion perspective, all I kept hearing when you were saying return to work versus return to workplace, which is brilliant. You're right. The work didn't change. And so now what's happening is we're changing language and we're changing the connotations that come along with that. So what is interesting is that 3 years ago, wow, I can't believe it's been that long. 3 years ago, we kept saying, oh no, we can't work from home. People can't do that. We'll never be productive. You cannot do it. And it was true. And if you worked from home, unless it was in certain arenas or you were established, if you asked to work from home, it was like, I just don't know if we can do that. And leaders didn't know if they could meet people where they were. And there were all these connotations, and they weren't good about working from home. And of course, as someone who works for the Mom Project, I have to throw in this other thing. We talk about working moms, which I personally find to be very offensive. All moms work. You work when you're at home. Like, being a mom is a full-time job. So we talk about dual working moms. I work inside the home and I work outside the home. And I think one of the things that as leaders we can start to be more thoughtful about is the words we're using and the connotation that comes with them.
Mhm.
Yeah, I appreciate that reminder, Rocki. And so I just want to pause for just a second and say, just to do a quick mini recap. So we've talked about the fact that that every organization, every company is still trying to figure this out. Nobody has figured out the answer yet. And I might even offer that the right answer or the best answer is going to be different for different groups of humans in different organizations and workplaces. We've talked about some of the new language, whether it's return to the workplace or the return to the office plan, or are you a 2 and 3 or a 1 and 4? How many anchor days do you have in the workplace? So as we're trying to define this new reality, what's the language we're using, and then some of the importance of intentionality for why do we make the decisions about when humans need to be together? What does that look like, and how do we message that intentionality, and what's again the language that we use on that journey? I want to take us back for a second and just talk about, as you both will know, I like to be one of those humans that's like, let's just be humans first. Work comes second, humans first. And take us back to the beginning of the pandemic. So we were just talking about 3 years ago in January of 2020, I'm sure none of us would have thought we would be here today having this conversation. We'd probably thought we would just be like, maybe we can still get someone to do a virtual work program. The world changed in March of 2020. And I know for me, it was hard. It was hard when all of a sudden I couldn't go to the workplace. I tend to be more extroverted. I battle anxiety and depression. And so all of a sudden you said, Brian, you can't see humans anymore and you can't go to work, which is one of the places I got the most connection with other humans. And we were talking a few minutes ago about the spaces that were curated by different groups to bring humans together. And Jaime, of course, I was part of the Inspire team, and the calls that you created for us to come together as just humans, to be like, are you okay? Let's just talk. And the Jennifer Brown community calls, which connected me with other colleagues, which is how I met Rocki. First met Rocki, and those communities made a huge difference for me, for that person who's like, I'm home alone and this is hard. And how do I find connection and community? I want to just ask each of you, and Rocki, I'll start with you. How did the pandemic just affect you as a human?
Yeah. It's really interesting. I will remember that really clearly, because the week that we shut down in the US, I had literally been traveling, and I had traveled from Florida to New York to California to back. And as I was traveling back and the world was starting to shut down, I had a little bit of a tickle in my throat. And I remember taking the last flight home on a Friday night and being terrified to even clear my throat, because I thought they were gonna toss me off the plane or think I had, COVID. But kind of coming and making that move and that transition, Brian, it's really interesting because I struggle with anxiety as well, but I am an introvert that behaves like an extrovert. I love my time with people, but I'm quite content here in my woman cave, right? And had been moving to do more work from home, because what happens is when I'm with people all day, I want to talk to them and I want to interact with them and I want to make space and time for them. And so I would do that. And then I would go, oh, it's 3 o'clock. I need to sit down and actually do the work that I'm here to do. And I found that to be very challenging when you're a people priority person. And yet, and still, I noticed the days at that time I was taking one day. We had just worked out, I was going to work from home one day. And those days where I worked from home, even if I had video calls, it was so productive and a good balance. And I'm one of those people, in full transparency, that there is literally not enough money anyone could pay me to go back to work and work in an office. Like, that's of zero interest to me personally. But it is also interesting what I learned and what I was reminded of is even the small things that we take, those of us who are privileged to take as privilege, right? So things like, this was my woman cave, which is why it's decorated the way it is. It's been, redecorated a bit since I've started working, but I had a woman cave at home. So it was really easy for me to come and drop my computer and plug and go to work. I had someone working for me that was in New York in a 500 square foot apartment where her and her partner were working. And literally she would be sitting in the tub with her knees and her laptop because it was the only place that she could get quiet in. There was another moment of privilege that I experienced during that time where we were doing what I thought was a really good job to make people or to help people get set up at home. You don't have to come into the office and get the office chair, come into the office and get the monitors. Like, we want this to be as much as you can, right? Like, come get it all, whatever you need. If you don't have a laptop, because there were some people in our offices that were working on at their station, excuse me, we'll buy you a laptop, no problem, right? So we think we're doing all the right things. And then someone who, by the way, was very close to me, called me out of my privilege and said, you're making an assumption that someone has the right level of internet to be able to work from home. And I just remember that moment of how humbling that was, right? And so for me, it was also like, it was a time that I could never see coming. It was a time in the world where you were really nervous. At that time, I still had kids in school. My son was finishing up his senior year. I give all the praise to anyone who's on here who's had to get kids through virtual school, especially at that time where they didn't have it all worked out. It was like the most stressful 3 months of my life. It caused challenges literally with my son and his relationship with us as we were trying to get through that. And so now you're asking people to navigate in small spaces, things that, that we just took for granted in the office. And now, they're coming home and they're having to take caretakers to children, to parents, to other people in the family. They're trying to navigate that with the traditional dynamics and rules that applied in the office, and no one quite knew what to do. That's what it felt like. So in 2 words, it just felt like chaos and foolishness.
Oh my goodness, yes, and I think I appreciate you're an introvert that acts like an extrovert. Like I actually, one thing that was interesting for me is I actually learned on the MBTI I fall right in the middle, and so I actually learned to embrace my introvert side and find like joy in spending time with myself. So I'm one of those, I'm gonna look for the silver linings of this. And that was one of them, is I learned how to be with me in a different way. But when you talk about the role of parents, I'm single, I don't have kids, at least not yet. Although my sister's pregnant, so I get to be an uncle soon. So I'm very excited about that. She and her wife shared that with us over the holidays. So thrilled for them, of course. I was in the fall of 2020, when some school districts were starting to go back to school in some way, shape, or form, I was living with friends as part of my nomad year during the pandemic. And my friends Phil and Sean, who I was living with at the time, had 3 boys. 2 were 6 and 1 was 5. And through my door, I had a sort of separated space that was connected to the house. I heard all of the joy that Phil and Sean were navigating to get their 3 boys to go back to school, but not at school, in their workstations, and appreciated the challenges of life as a parent in a way that I never had before. So I want to honor all parents who are engaged and part of that conversation, because it was certainly was eye-opening for me. So my yet became a yet with a question mark, because I know I do want kids, and I'm like, that's a lot. So you know, but it was also wonderful to see how they love those little humans, and how they, you know, how they grow up, and how those moments help them thrive. So you know, so kudos to you for showing up for your son Rocki and your kids. And I know it wasn't easy always, but I know it makes a difference. Jamie, how did it affect you?
How much time do you have? So let's, I tend to, as the people in my house would tell me, this is probably my most annoying quality. I tend to live in the future. So I actually was paying pretty close attention to everything going on in Wuhan, starting in late January. And which again made me tricky to be around. But when things hit, what was crystal clear for me, our kids were both in 9th grade at that time, was that I wanted to just, you know, keep the company on track and keep the house on track. And it was just, I know that there's a certain amount of self-care that I just try to like attempt to put into each day. And I was like, Jaime Klein, whatever you're doing, you got to dial it up × 5, because you need to like just get ready for, you know what it felt like? It felt like cognitive overload, like just also like triage decision making. Like, can we leave the, you know, we live in a very modest house in the burbs outside the city in Jersey, as they say, but like, can we go on the front lawn? Can we do a class in the, you know, in like on the back little lawn? Like, just what were the options? How far could you go? Could you say hi to a neighbor? I mean, I'm talking real early days, but I think that I think during that time, what I was clear on was that I need to dial up self-care. I needed to also make sure that I was really authentic with our kids and just say, do not have all the answers. You've got great questions. I continue to not have all the answers, but I'm going to tell you the things that I know. I'm going to just not sugarcoat anything for you. And we're just going to keep you posted. But what I do know is whatever we do each on our own during the family, just meet in the dining room at 6, because we're going to just try to have some semblance of a family meal. There are no fresh veggies to be found, but I got some frozen peas that we're going to put in the microwave and pretend that we're getting some greens in us. But it was just like trying to create, Brian, like these like micro moments of any type of like structure and consistency, just that there was some structure. But you know, it was a funny thing. It was like all of us were working, of course, like just like meeting like in like the kitchen sometimes to just like quickly heat up food. I was like, oh, this is like the break room at an office. Like there's those little moments that I just think back on. But I am a late onset introvert. I think I learned during this time that I actually do enjoy some time just to be really still. And so for me, that's a silver lining of the pandemic. I'm always looking for them, but I think I realized during this time that just taking some time to be really still and quiet my mind is really like care and feeding instructions. Like it's not even negotiable. Like I just need some downtime. Yeah. So because I can work like a 10 to 12 hour day with like a couple of like green juices and be like, all right, let's do it again tomorrow. And I realized during this time that I just need to pace myself and do more self-care and just leave just a morsel of time for just to breathe at the end of the day so I can get up and try to do it again the next day. Yeah.
Well, it's something, and I know that all three of us would say we can only truly speak for ourselves. One thing that I think that I heard in there that I feel like I could say is probably true for everyone is that we all had to find our new whatever normal was in that. And not everyone loves the phrase the new normal, and I respect that, whatever language works for you, but just the concept of my world shifted overnight, and humans like stability and consistency for the most part. That's generally how we're programmed. And all of a sudden it's like, we're going to just rip this carpet out from under you. And it happened to all of us at the same time. And now we're all trying to find our place. And so, you know, I think that that's an interesting reality to be faced just as individuals. So, and I love the, you know, the lens of self-care and self-reflection and what does this mean for me and what does this mean for my units, my people. I want to take this to another lens now and say, what does it mean for each of you as leaders or as managers? How did it, you know, now you're like, okay, I'm aware that my world has shifted. It's also true for anyone that that's part of my team or part of the organization I'm responsible for. So how did that shift or change how you showed up as a manager leader? Jamie, I'll start with you.
Yeah. And you know what I just want to reflect on, I'm 50s. So like, I'm thinking of like other challenges as a leader, right? Like I was in Manhattan on 9/11, or, you know, the economic downturn of 08. Like when you think of like 9/11, for those of us who were impacted wherever we were, like there was someone you could call, a family or friend, that like didn't live in a city that was as closely impacted, and they were like, God, that seems crazy, I'm watching it on CNN, and how are you? But like their city didn't have smoke. And I think what happened during the pandemic is everyone had smoke. Like
Mhm.
like your dentist who should be focused while dealing with cavity, like there was smoke. Like it's been a pandemic in their house for 3 years also. Like just to also realize as a leader that we're trying to do the best that we can, but also realize that there was no one that had tons of gas in the tank. No one had tons of reserve. So your question is, how have I led during the pandemic? So there's this phrase that I use, it probably sounds trite, but it's like leading with heart. Like I always talk about, like, you know, if you have to make tough decisions as a leader, like how do you first think about the people implications? And so I think, you know, so my situation's a little bit unique, Brian, just to give quick context. So when I started the company 15 years ago, there was no such thing as fractional work for HR people. So that's what I started doing. And now there's 30 plus folks that all work as part-time employees doing this. So everyone had been at home office and gone on site as needed. So I didn't feel like I had privilege there, right? I didn't just like re-architect the infrastructure. What I did need to do though, is realize that as HR people, my whole team is like these containers of holding other people's stress, and these containers of always having the energy to plan for clients. And I needed to find a way to make sure that all the containers had space, because all in, we were like one of those huge Rubbermaid containers that are like big enough to hold a lasagna. It's like all like the containers of the containers. So what I tried to do for the company was dial up self-care. So things like Brian mentioned, we hosted this thing on Thursdays, just called or Fridays, called Inside Inspire. It was just like, come, just check in, share a joke, share what you're doing for self-care, or did you find a great new Netflix series? Like just to create that. We also ended up launching a well-being pledge, and I'd learned about this from IBM, but the idea was that truly stating in meetings, part of the company mission, talking about the importance of well-being. And I can share it with anybody if that's helpful, if they want to think about architecting theirs. But what it talks about is like taking care of ourselves in a way that doesn't feel like more work, giving ourselves and each other, you know, grace and mutual respect, and just like keeping it real when life happens. And just literally, we have this thing where we can just say to other folks, like, I'll get back to you. And it just means like, there's something complicated in addition to work going on right now, and I'll get back to you. I just can't right now. And it's like a safe word. So like those types of little things. And then just having really honest conversations with people about what kind of capacity they had, what they could take on, what core hours work for them. So those types of things came to mind as a leader, realizing that we then wanted to have the energy to like help these other companies figure out how to lead, because it was really stressful for them too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to just ask one other quick follow-up for you, Jaime, because I was part of this at the time, is how did you navigate the boundaries that you set for consultants who were, particularly when we started to go back into workplaces? I remember very clear that you were, and it felt good to be a consultant, that Jaime was going to say no. If the consultant doesn't feel good, then the answer is like, we can't do it.
Oh, absolutely. So so my family calls me a little Fauci. I'm like pretty intense about just all the safety, trying to insulate everybody from risk kind of stuff with this pandemic situation. So just one, it was asking employees, where are you on your journey? Are you comfortable going back at all? If, then it was like, we would ask companies for their policy, like masks, no masks, how much we got really granular. They had to send us their policy, and we would share it with the expert in advance and say, is this comfortable for you? And sometimes companies were further along on their journey at jumping back in than our experts were. And we just said, we're so sorry, we can't help you, but we can introduce you to another company that can. But yeah, that was just what we wanted to do from the beginning. Yeah. So I don't know.
And I appreciate and I remember that time, and what I'm hearing is, and that's something that I just would say is really important, and not only in this conversation, but just generally in the workplace, is understanding what an individual needs, where they are, and finding ways to meet that need and meet them where they are, which I think is harder from an HR professional or a manager perspective or a leader perspective. And it's also, I think, more effective. Like you engender trust and engagement in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, look, we all have these 120 years on earth. Like, you just got to be doing the work that you love. And if you're feeling like you're with the good people and you're doing the good work, you're going to always work that you believe in, you're going to always crush it. And I think you can get more done with some, fill someone's well as a human and also over deliver for the client. Like, if all, like, you get more done in 20 hours if they're feeling good about the work than 60 hours. So I don't know, remember when we were little and we would go to elementary school? I don't know, I had this great third grade teacher, and like, you fill out a little index card with like who lives with you at home, what your favorite color is, and like what you like for lunch. It was kind of like your care and feeding instructions. It's almost like, I think in professional relationships, like just asking folks like, what's really important to you and what holidays are really important to you, and just really understanding what makes people tick, I think is everything.
Yeah. Well, I want to hear, Rocki, from you about how it changed how you lead and manage, and then we're going to pivot into like some of our recommendations and tips and things like that. So, but let's start with Rocki. How did the pandemic shift how you led and managed, particularly in this working environment space?
Yeah, well, I want to bring a different perspective, because like whoever wants to follow Jaime, she's got so much great
Oh,
insight.
don't I know? Don't
Right?
I know?
So I want to remind us what else was going on at this time, is that there was so much going around with social justice. Right. And we had not only experienced COVID, but during that time we, experienced the murder of George Floyd and, Breonna Taylor, and the list goes on and on. And so for me, who at that time in my career, I had to make some decisions in my career. And so during that time, I shifted my focus to be more on the diversity piece. Right. And so when I think about I still had teams that reported to me, right? And I've carried that into even my current role. But I think there was an interesting focus there about trying to now look at people through the eyes of multiple dimensions of diversity and how they may be experiencing this new way of working and this total and complete fear that some of the triggers that we could see if someone was not mentally healthy, you couldn't see those as clearly in this virtual work environment. And that really became a deep concern to me, right? And so I think now you're trying to say and trying to understand and trying to have conversations with people and teach leaders who may not be where you are, where you were. And look, like Jennifer Brown, how to be an inclusive leader, right? I love when she talks about kind of these, these four levels of where you are in your diversity journey as a leader. And guess what? You may be a level 4 over here, but if you think about this dimension of diversity, you may be a 0. And so how do I, and then how do others adapt the language to have the right conversations with people to meet them where they are in their journey and to address their dimension and not only address, but respect their dimensions of diversity, right? And so what do I do for someone who is experiencing deep trauma when they see something in the news? What do I do for someone who may be hearing impaired and is really struggling with not being able to read lips in this way that this virtual meeting world is working? What do I do with someone who struggles with anxiety or depression and is now living by themselves? I mean, let's think back to that. There were people who literally did not leave their house. Brian, thank you so much. Who literally did not leave their house for like a year. right? And they lived by themselves and they didn't have an animal even to keep them. Like, I can't think of anything more isolating than that. And how are we like literally making sure we're paying extra care and attention? So at one place I worked, we actually put together these health teams. They weren't identified, but we kind of did it by you know, kind of in the behind the scenes. And so if we knew that Brian was living by himself, there was a rotation of people who made sure that they touch base with Brian to make sure that Brian was okay, or that we heard from Brian, or if he didn't seem okay, that we triggered some alerts. And so for me, in a way that never happened before, and look, I've paid thousands of dollars in therapy. I have no problems with doing that, but in ways that didn't happen before, I was focused on like, how do we make people healthy? And or at least not actually how do we know, but how do we make it okay to say you're not okay? And this is a problem, right? Like, because we're conditioned to say, okay, we're conditioned to, hey, Brian, how you doing today? I'm okay. And I don't stop and go, is he really okay? Did he say that differently? I'm like, okay, he said, okay. So like now let me move on to my checkbox, right? And so reconditioning ourselves to stop, be a little bit more intentional, to be a little bit more intentional, because you couldn't be in a room of people. Like, I was really known as a leader. It's very funny that when the pandemic hit, I remember us wrapping up and closing the building and someone saying to me, well, my God, what are we going to do without the Rocki hugs? And do you know how to lead without a hug? Because people would come into the building and they'd always get a Rocki hug. Like, and so it was my way of really kind of being very thoughtful about, how do I now hug people virtually, and how do I meet them where they are, given their dimensions of diversity?
Yeah. Yes. Well, so many tidbits of wisdom and realities that humans are facing. And Rocki, I just want to say thank you for surfacing the important conversation around the systemic oppression, and certainly the murder of George Floyd opened so many of our eyes in ways that we hadn't before. And certainly I'm one of those humans that wish I'd paid attention in different ways before that time. I can't go back, but I can try to do better going forward. So I'm gonna keep us on the working hybrid workplace train, because I always want to talk about the realities of systemic oppression, and those are important conversations. But we're gonna do that in a future session of human-centered leading. So trust that we will cover that topic. And Rocki and I have some things up our sleeve that we're going to share at some point in the future. So stay tuned for that. I want to talk about, but I do want to acknowledge that, because I think it is an important conversation, that the reality of the pandemic, while we're talking about humans as a whole, did have an impact on different groups of humans in very different ways. And certainly there are some of those that are terrible and tragic that we need to do better at. So I think that is an important part of this conversation. I want to talk in our last, we have about 12 minutes left, and just share some of our tips for how do we get this right, or what are the things that you might challenge leaders to not do. And I'm going to share two things that come to mind for me, and then I'll invite each of you to share, your thoughts. The first is something that we learned at Hummingbird was, so Hummingbird I launched in May of 2020. So we're 100% virtual. I actually hadn't met most of the team for the first 18 months we worked together. I think I have met almost everyone in person now. But there's a couple people that I still haven't met in person. And if you would have asked me 3 years ago if I'd be hiring people that I never met in person, like, I would have said, I don't think you know what you're talking about. You don't know how hiring works. But now I've learned that you can build bonds and connections in virtual spaces in different ways, and powerful ways and meaningful ways. But one of the things that has happened for us is we use Slack as our communication tool. And as I think we've all learned at other points in our lives, that written communication can lose without the nonverbal cues and the tone and intonation, that sometimes the message can get lost. And we were finding that not often, but enough would happen where two people would be going back and forth in Slack, and the energy would like ramp up, and we're like, I'm really frustrated you're not hearing me. I'm really frustrated you're not hearing me. And we decided to implement a safe word. So if one of those moments happens, we just say pineapple, the conversation stops.
Yeah.
Then we take it into a verbal conversation, whether a video chat or a phone call. And what we have learned is every time we did that, it was just a misunderstanding that people were reading the words differently. And once they talked on the phone or in the video chat, it made it easier. So that's one tidbit that I wanted to share that I think is really interesting, is finding a way to acknowledge that those written communications can get confusing at times. So, and I was going to share a second one. I'm sure it'll come back to me, but it's not there right now. So I'm going to go, Rocki, what's your suggestion that you would offer, or challenge you might offer?
You know, I do think it's very complicated. And so here's what I would say. A lot of times you think you're doing all of the right things, right? We do all hands meetings, and we do HR caffeine boosts, and we've had listening circles when things are going on, and we have one-on-one meetings, and we have team meetings. And so, you know, as a leader, you're going, okay, here's all, to your point, we have Slack, which I think kind of honestly, I love Slack, but it also makes me feel like I do when I go into Chuck E. Cheese. I'm just a little bit overwhelmed. There's just too much going on, and I don't know what to look at any given time, right?
But I love Chuck E. Cheese too. Like, yeah, we love it. And
yeah, I think Chuck E. Cheese is like the devil's spawn. We could do a whole thing
segment on Chuck E. Cheese. Okay, I'll put it on my list.
Right. But I do think, you know, as a leader, you kind of go, here's all of this information you're giving, and we're doing all these things to communicate, but you're looking at it through your point of view. And so, like, this year we created what we called a talent and culture council, where we brought people through from various organizations, levels, dimensions of diversity in our organization, to feed information back to us, because what we think is working and checks all the boxes really may not. And you may need to listen to other people who will represent the whole and kind of tell you the truth. And then I think for me, one thing that's worked really well is this simple question. Now, there's some action that has to sit behind this. I ask people quite often, what can I do to help and support? And then I listen. And a lot of times they'll say nothing, or I don't know, or whatever. But when someone gives me an answer to that question, then I genuinely action it. And if I cannot action it, I tell them that I can't action it and tell them why. And so I think that's a way of building. We've got some things going on in the chat. I can't about trust and safety and psychological safe environments. If you know that as a leader, if you tell this later, I need help and support this way, and they're willing to do it, nothing's more safe than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I want to just sort of anchor back to the journey we've gone on. We started with talking about some of the definitions and the ways that this is playing out in the conversations we're having about hybrid workplaces. And we talked about how it affected us as humans, and then how it changed how we lead and manage. And now we're talking about some of the decisions that we can make and some of the considerations. And some of those, of course, have already come up in the conversation. We talked about how companies and organizations are thinking about well-being and supporting mental health. I definitely have, with our clients, and just even conversations I'm in, seen a significant rise in how companies are acknowledging the realities of mental health. Certainly, we know we have a mental health epidemic that has and a crisis that has existed before the pandemic, but has really become even more of a concern over the course of the last 3 years. And companies are trying to find ways to meet those needs. And I would really encourage companies, if you're not doing that, to figure it out and to step into that. And if you need help, reach out to Jaime or Rocki or I. We're here to help. I also put a mental health and workplace resource guide in our chat and Zoom, and we'll make sure we share the link and LinkedIn as well. And I think Rocki, again, I think this is you reinforced another message, which is those individual conversations that with individual humans about what do you need. What I really love that you added there is the importance of an honest response. I can, if they have a request, can I meet that request or can I not? It's uncomfortable to say it's not within my power, or it's not something I have, but you can offer an alternative. But I think I think that's something that often gets missed, and that breaks that safety. And I appreciate you acknowledging this sort of conversation around trust and safety. How are we creating environments that allow people to have these conversations, which I think is actually a good question regardless. So definitely a future conversation on human-centered leading is how do we create trust and safety, regardless of whether it's virtual or in person, because I think that's so important. What's on your mind, Jaime? What's your tidbit?
1,200 things. So I think, do you remember how before the pandemic, you would go into someone's office or cube workspace and you would see like a picture of them and the humans, pets that were most important to them. And it was typically in a very pretty frame. No one had broccoli in their teeth, or like it was like slightly photoshopped living. And you're like, oh, and in your mind, you'd be like, oh, that's their home team, or that's kind of that's who they do life with. So I think what we've seen during the pandemic that we cannot unsee is what really life is like for people. And I think moving forward, it's about like remembering what we've seen, like remember in the early days when that teenager that photoshopped, no broccoli in their teeth teenager in the frame was that maybe that person never spoke about how they had a family. Suddenly that person's leaning into your Zoom calls and helping with the tech support, right? Or everyone was down and suddenly that dog was on the keyboard. It was just like a bosco, it's just these up moments. So I think as we're moving forward, I think it's also important to remember that even though we're in this hybrid kind of eking our way out of the pandemic moment, to not forget the things that used to really fill people up that you learned all about, right? It's if you know that they've had dinner as a family for, I don't know, over 1,000 days in a row because they weren't traveling for work, and don't schedule a 6 o'clock meeting with them, because guess what? Their family's in the habit of seeing them for mac and cheese night or whatever's going on. I think the other thing is we learned during this time is more holistically what people have going on at home. So Rocki, I was thinking, I really appreciated what you said earlier about privilege. I think of family and friends who have kids in their home, who have ongoing learning disabilities, mental health challenges, all those services stopped during the pandemic. It wasn't safe to have, someone come into your house and help you with speech therapy with a mask on, you just couldn't do it. So you might, and you kind of got filled in on that during the pandemic because people just spoke more openly about what was going on and how challenging it was for them. So now that we know all that stuff, doesn't that make for richer relationships and richer professional connections? And let's keep those conversations going. There's an author that I really respect. She's a friend, Erica Keswin, and she talked on one of our panels last year about when you meet people, ask how are you really, really doing? We started to do that during the pandemic, but we should always be doing that as leaders. So I guess in sum, Brian, there's this new shorthand authenticity, bringing your full self to work leadership that I think is very modern, that we need to continue to create the most modern workplaces. Yeah. Rocki, maybe you can't give those hugs in person, but I have a feeling there are other ways you can give people, you can show people the love and let your light shine on them, even though they can't get it in person. So we just need to keep those things going. Yeah. And we're all winging it. And again, just realizing we are at a time that we're just kind of all in beta as humans and as workplaces. But I think the most modern workplaces will continue to weave in inclusion, weave in wellness, weave in all, and what gets measured gets done. So just keep that going at the top of the house as much as you can.
Oh my gosh, so many good tidbits there. I think Jamie, I love that you brought us back to this just general, the concept and the frameworks of what does it mean to be a human-centered leader today? And I think I'll end with one challenge, and then I'll invite us just to share some final thoughts as we wrap up our time together. It goes so quickly. And one thing that actually I'll mention is we're going to be putting together a humanity and hybrid working guide. So we'll be releasing that guide next month. So we'll borrow from all the great things that Rocki and Jamie have shared and some research that we've done, actually, and by we, I mean JD Valladares-Williams, who's done lots of great research to put that guide together. So we'll be sharing that next month, and certainly we'll be sharing the recording to today's session. The challenge that I want to offer to leaders and managers and decision makers is don't go backwards. I've seen so many companies and some of the clients, and I've said this to some of the CEOs that I get to work with and say, I think you're making a bad call by saying we're going to go back to the workplace that we did before. We learned that we can achieve success in this virtual environment. And we also learned that for some people, it actually works better. And for some people, they want the in-person space. And is it more complex, I think, to treat people like individuals and humans? Yes. So I get that it can be a little harder. I think it's also more rewarding and more impactful for those people and ultimately your business or your organization. So don't go back. Try and blaze the new trail and keep going. Well, what I want to invite just each of you both to share is what brings you joy today, and any just final words, and how people can connect with you. So Rocki, do you want to go first?
What's bringing me joy today is this wonderful group of people that I'm spending time with. Brian and Jamie, like when Brian and I first met, we instantaneously connected, and that ability to build a community and add to that community in this year certainly brings me joy. My LinkedIn has been dropped in the chat. Please feel free to follow or connect with me there. It's the best way to get to me. Thank you both. Brian, thanks for creating this format.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being here, Rocki. Jamie, what about you?
Okay, so yes to getting to spend time with the two of you. Tactically, the thing that's bringing me joy is I have a light next to me. It's called Happy Light, and it's like a light that makes me feel, I call it there's like a button on it, and I call it my Boca button. I feel like I'm in like Boca, Florida when I press it. And this blue light thing is on my desk really from Halloween to Passover, Easter time. So that's my joy thing, just like bring in the light. And the days are getting a touch longer. We're almost towards spring, little by little by little. And that's the thing that's bringing me joy in this particular afternoon. Yeah, but great being with you.
I love that. Yes. It's such a pleasure. Thank you both for saying yes. I will share what's bringing me joy. And some of you who follow me on social or certainly the Hummingbird team know that my dog Bosco, who's our chief happiness officer at Hummingbird, has been sick. And we got good news today that his cortisol levels are back to normal, and he gets to come home tomorrow or Friday. It's not, I keep thinking tomorrow's Friday. I don't know why. I'm accelerating the week. So the chief happiness officer will be back in action, which is important to me, certainly, as my companion, and also just as the joy and inspiration that Bosco brings to the Hummingbird community. I look forward to you all getting to see Bosco again soon. So Jamie, Rocki, thank you so much. Everyone who's joined us, whether live or watching us, watching the replay, thank you so much for choosing to spend time with us. I hope this session has been helpful. Please feel free to reach out to us at the Hummingbird team. You can reach out at hello@hummingbirdhumanity.com and share your recommendations, your feedback, your thoughts. If you want to hear a topic, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and because we're here to be of service to you and help you all create workplaces where humans thrive. So again, thanks again for joining us for our first episode of Human-Centered Leading. And until next time, stay safe and be well. Bye, everyone.
Bye.